Hi, this is Mary Jo Mueller with IBM. For this module, important, all VPAT editions and training modules were updated in March 2022 to reflect current accessibility requirements. Note the following updates, which supersede some of the information presented in this training video. On slide 5 at 3 minutes 20 seconds, WCAG 2.2 is now expected to complete in 2022. WCAG 3 expected completion will potentially be in 2026.
Okay, welcome to the third installment of the Information Technology Industry Council VPAT training. This module covers the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. I'm Mary Jo Mueller, and I'm the Accessibility Standards Program Manager for IBM. Michelle Van Duzer, who is Senior Accessibility Program Manager for Oracle, is my co-host. In the group of VPAT training modules, this WCAG module is number 3 of 8. Hopefully you've already completed modules 1 and 2, which gives background helpful in understanding the content of this module. So the goals of this module, you'll first learn some of the basics about WCAG, like what it is and who develops it. Then I'll give a brief overview of the WCAG criteria and how they're organized. And then you'll learn how WCAG is applied to all products, including hardware, software, documentation, and support services. So WCAG, what is it? It is an acronym that stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and it's produced in the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C. The standard, it's contributed to and developed by a consortium of members who are all well-versed in accessibility, from people with disabilities to accessibility consultants to industry members, like companies that are members of ITI, who also developed the VPAT. WCAG as a standard is used throughout the world in policies and regulations as technical requirements for anything seen on a display, from web and non-web user interfaces and content to any form of electronic documentation. There are several versions of WCAG in existence. Some are final versions, like versions 1.0, 2.0, and 2.1. If you look at the standard itself, you'll see the words W3C recommendation. The recommended or the recommendation verbiage is terminology that the W3C uses to indicate it's a finalized standard. It doesn't mean that the criteria in WCAG are optional. They are required whenever used in regulatory requirements. So updates to WCAG, well, they have been pretty slow, coming about every 9 to 10 years. It just shows you how long standards development can be. It's kind of a tedious process. WCAG 1 came out in 1999, WCAG 2 in 2008, and 2.1 is the latest version, completed in June of 2018. Most regulations worldwide use either WCAG 2 or 2.1, and 2.1 is really basically version 2.0 plus new requirements, which cover mobile and touchscreen devices, as well as requirements that better address the user needs of people with low vision and cognitive and learning disabilities. So the WCAG levels, there's 3 levels to WCAG. There's level A, AA, and AAA. So each requirement in WCAG has been assigned a level as part of the standard. So when you're talking about performance to WCAG as a whole. The levels are cumulative. So when a regulation says products must meet WCAG Level AA, it means you need to meet both Levels A and AA requirements. Most standards and policies that incorporate WCAG require Level AA. There is a AAA level, but those requirements are often considered kind of above and beyond. They're sometimes more difficult requirements to implement or test. And currently, there are no regulations that require it. But it can make your content more accessible if you choose to do it. So WCAG POR, I don't know if anybody has heard POR before, but there's it's an acronym that talks about the principles, the major principles that the criteria are divided up in inside of WCAG. POR stands for Perceivable, Operable, Understandable, and Robust. And I'll get into a little more detail in the next couple slides. So the first two are perceivable and operable. Perceivable is what can be perceived by your senses, such as seeing or hearing. For content delivered to the user, they need to be able to perceive it in order to understand it or act on it. It's all about having content presented in a way that any user can know something's there, like having text alternatives for images or having captions and audio description for multimedia. Content needs to be implemented in a way it can be adapted or interpreted by assistive technology, like a screen reader. In general, it makes it easier for users to see and hear content, like having good contrast or allowing users to change the text size without losing content. Operable means the user can operate the content and the interactive elements, so they can use their preferred method of interaction. They may use a mouse or touch or a keyboard, or they may use their voice. Some of the criteria under this principle focus on making content keyboard accessible without navigation getting stuck or trapped in the content. Other criteria are about adapting timed aspects of the content so that a user can take the time that they need to complete the task. The operable principle also includes requirements for moving, blinking, or flashing content that could be distracting or cause some sort of physical harm, like seizures. Navigation is another important area, as users need to have easy ways to navigate, find what they're looking for, and be able to orient themselves to where they are in the content as they navigate. Understandable and robust. For the understandable principle, users need to be able to understand the content. For example, identifying the language of the content enables assistive technology to use the correct pronunciation of words. The content must also be consistent in how it's presented and operate in ways that are predictable. Finally, to help users avoid and correct mistakes by ensuring interactive elements, headings, and links are correctly labeled, and input errors are easy to find and fix. The last principle is robust. This means that the content is compatible with assistive technology, browsers, and other user agents. It provides the right programmatic information to be interpreted and then relayed to the user. So WCAG is applied to non-web technologies by other standards and regulations, like, for example, US Section 508 and the European EN 301549 standards. This slide has a table with 3 columns. The first column is the technology or functionality, and the other 2 columns are revised 508 and the EN 301549. The purpose of this table is to show how the regulatory standards apply WCAG to various technologies, whether it fully applies all of the criteria, which is indicated in the table with the yes, or and both 508 and the EN apply all of the WCAG Level AA criteria to web-based documentation, and authoring tool functionality. Now that's level A and AA, remember, because we talked about when a regulation picks it up, it's both. For non-web software and non-web documentation, both 508 and the EN have exceptions for certain WCAG criteria, which we'll go into in the next slides. Finally, there's the case of closed functionality software. So you may not know what a closed product is, so I'll explain real quickly. Closed products are those that are closed to installing assistive technology, such as a screen reader. Some examples are ATMs, printers, kiosks, and so forth. Software that's used to provide the user interface on these products has to be accessible and is covered by the closed functionality requirements. In the U.S. revised Section 508, it does not apply WCAG directly to closed product software. It has separate criteria for that software in the subsection on closed products. And that'll be covered in more detail in the 508 session. The EN 301549, on the other hand, it applies WCAG, but it makes some additional exceptions and also has some replacement criteria where it just references another section instead of using the exact verbiage from WCAG. So you have to kind of read that a little bit carefully if you're meeting the EN to make sure that you cover the requirements. So I'll get into the exceptions I was talking about. For 508, non-web documents aren't required to meet the following criteria. That is a 2.1.4 bypass blocks, 2.4.5 multiple ways, 3.2.3 consistent navigation, and 3.2.4 consistent identification. These exceptions are stated in E205.5 accessibility standard, which is in the scoping chapter for 508. These exceptions came from the work that the World Wide Web Consortium Task Force, the WCAG to ICT Task Force, did to develop a document that shows how WCAG can be interpreted for non-web technologies. And these criteria were considered problematic and so were accepted. So for non-web software, there are also exceptions for some WCAG criteria in the US revised Section 508. Again, it's stated in the scoping chapter, but under E207.2, WCAG conformance, it shows an exception that non-web software is not required to conform to the same 4 criteria as on the previous slide: bypass blocks, multiple ways, consistent navigation, and consistent identification. It also has an exception for WCAG conformance requirement 3, which is complete processes. The EN 301549, on the other hand, has a few more exceptions in different cases. So I have put a table in there to list the accepted criteria and what technology has that exception, whether it's non-web documents, non-web software, and closed functionality software. The word required is in the table to show which technologies are required to meet those criteria. And in the other cells of the table, it shows how it's accepted as an exception. It's stated as an exception. The EN actually has, it has numbered sections for every single WCAG criteria. So it's really explicit in how it shows the criteria that has an exception in its description. Sometimes the verbiage is void, and sometimes it does not have to meet, and in one case it says not applicable. So that's why this table is kind of a good summarization The one thing in common with 508 is that the same 4 criteria have an exception: 2.4.1 bypass blocks, 2.4.5 multiple ways, 3.2.3 consistent navigation, and 3.2.4 consistent identification. And the exception applies to non-web documents, non-web software, and closed functionality software. In addition, both non-web software and closed functionality software do not have to meet 2.4.2 page titled and 3.1.2 language of parts. Finally, closed functionality software does not have to meet 4.1.1 parsing and 4.1.2 name, role, and value, where the standard says does not have to meet. And it also has an exception for 1.1.3 status messages, where it says not applicable. So that's kind of the rundown of all of the exceptions to applying WCAG criteria to non-web technologies. So support services are also important for accessibility. So support services are how customers get support for the technology products they purchased. There are statements in 508 and the EN 301-549 about making support services accessible. The revised 508 standards have provision 603.3, accommodation of communication needs, which reads, ICT support services shall accommodate the communication needs of individuals with disabilities. It doesn't specifically call out WCAG conformance, but if you have methods of support like a web-based live chatbot, FAQ, or other electronic form of communication, then you'd certainly want those to be WCAG compliant to provide effective communication. The EN 301-549 also has support services requirement that specifically requires WCAG conformance. It's 12.2.4 accessible documentation, which states documentation provided by support services shall be made available in at least one of the following electronic formats. A web format that conforms to Clause 9, and Clause 9 is the chapter with the web requirements. And B, a non-web format that conforms to Clause 10, which is the chapter of documentation requirements. In the applicable standards and guidelines portion, be sure to indicate yes or no for each of the levels of WCAG 2 and WCAG 2.1. If you're not reporting on WCAG 2.1, you could possibly remove that line from the table or simply answer no to each of the levels for that standard. If you are reporting on WCAG 2.1, be sure to also mark the same levels you're reporting in the WCAG 2.0 row. It's because WCAG 2.1 includes all of WCAG 2.0 criteria. So you might as well get credit for both. So the next slide is the WCAG 2.x report section of the VPAT. Levels A and AA. So I have 2 screenshots in here to show you the tables of the WCAG 2 section in the VPAT. Each table is for a level. There are actually 3 tables in the VPAT, one for level A, one for level AA, and one for AAA. So here on this page, I show the A and AA. In your ACR, you can choose to use these tables as is and have all of these tables as separate tables for the levels, or you can combine them into a single table. It's your choice, just as long as all of the requirements are listed. Each table has an area for notes, which you can provide information specific to that WCAG table, or you can simply delete the line if you have no comments or notes to put in there. When reporting WCAG conformance for each criteria, you'll fill in the conformance level, which we covered in the earlier training session, And then you add your remarks and explanations for each and every requirement, indicating how you meet or don't meet, or if there's a some sort of workaround or issue, you would document it there. So this here is the WCAG 2 report section of the VPAT for level AAA. So far, there are, as I said, no regulations that require AAA criteria to be met. Since they are more difficult to implement or test, you have a choice whether or not you want to strive to meet them. So you have some choices. If you're not reporting on level AAA, you can accomplish this in a couple of ways in your ACR. You can mark no and the level AAA in the applicable standards and guidelines table, which is toward the top of the VPAT. And then you have a choice of how you want to handle that table of requirements for AAA. You can either report not tested and give a remark or explanation that says something like, this product has not been tested for conformance to WCAG level AAA. Or you can just delete the table altogether and then in the notes for the table section, write a statement that you removed it. Pretty simple. So I just wanted to show you, the previous slides, they were showing the WCAG tables as they appear in the WCAG edition of the VPAT. I thought it would be interesting for you to see the tables look a bit different in the other editions. This one's the international edition of the VPAT, and this has the most information in it because it's reporting 3 standards. So basically, this table shows you how all of the standards are applying WCAG to the various technologies. So you'll see here it's a 1.1.1 non-text content, and this row shows all 7 requirements in the EN 301549. It lists them and how, it gives the number that's the chapter number and the requirement number that it is in the EN and what it applies to, because each chapter is to a different technology. And then it also shows the 3 places that the revised section 508 shows the incorporation of WCAG. So this is kind of a really good way to see how the other tables where the other slides where I was talking about how WCAG's applied to the different technologies, and here you can actually see it for a requirement. And in the international version, it's in there for each and every of the WCAG requirements. So as far as answering the conformance level and the remarks and explanations for this in the WCAG table, if every aspect of your product is accessible, you could use a single combined answer in the conformance level and in the remarks and explanation column. Or you can break out the different aspects of the product with more individualized answers for each technology type: web, electronic documentation, software, closed functionality software, or authoring tool. And if you don't have some of that functionality, you can remove those, those words that don't apply. Just make sure that you do answer, if you're doing an international version or 508, that you answer for those kinds of aspects where WCAG is required. So there are resources out there for you on WCAG so that you can learn the actual requirements and how to implement them, because this course does not cover that aspect of it. There's the WCAG 2.1 standard at www.w3.org/tr/WCAG 2.1. There's WCAG 2.1 at a glance. at www.w3.org/WAI/standards-guidelines/WCAG/glance, or how to meet WCAG, a quick reference, at www.w3.org/WAI/WCAG21/quickref. So at this point, if you have any questions or feedback, you can contact info@itic.org or telephone 1-202-737-8888. So I want to again thank ITI and all of the companies who contributed to the development of this VPAT training: HP, IBM, Intel, Lexmark, Oracle, and VMware. And I'd also like to thank you for taking this VPAT training. That's it.
So we want to open it for any questions at this point. If there's anything you want to ask, you can ask it in chat while we're recording this. And I don't see any at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and say thank you for attending and stop the recording.